in the unforgiving heart of the Arizona Territory, where the sun burned secrets into the dust and every shadow holds a story, a lone woman's world was about to be shattered and rebuilt by a single desperate promise. She was a widow, clinging to a patch of stubborn land and a memory of what she'd lost. He was a dying Apache warrior, a chief whose name was whispered in fear by settlers and reverence by his own people. And between them, wrapped in buckskin and hope, lay a child, an infant boy who carried the legacy of a nation in his blood. This isn't just a tale of the West, it's the story of a vow that defied a world of hate and how one woman, Nora Thompson, raised the son of her sworn enemy, igniting a fire that would either forge a new future or burn everything she held dear to the ground. The year was 1878. The heat in the San Simon Valley was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the air and baked the life out of the cracked earth. For Nora Thompson, the heat was an old, unwelcome companion. It had been her companion for the 2 years since her husband Samuel and their infant daughter Lily had been taken by the fever, leaving her the sole guardian of 100 acres of stubborn, thirsty land they had called Promise Creek Ranch. The creek was now more memory than water, but the promise remained, and Nora was as stubborn as the land itself. She was tracking a stray calf, its tracks faint in the pulverized dirt near the Dragoon Mountains. The sun hammered down on her wide-brimmed hat, and the leather of her saddle creaked a lonely rhythm. It was a fool's errand. The calf was likely coyote meat by now, but the work kept the silence at bay. The silence was the worst part of her new life, a hollow ache where laughter and a man's low voice used to be. That's when she saw the buzzards, a lazy dark spiral against the impossibly blue sky. Her hand went instinctively to the Winchester rifle holstered beside her leg. Buzzards meant death, and out here, death rarely traveled alone. She urged her mare, Dust Devil, forward her heart, a tight drum against her ribs. As she crested a small rocky rise, the scene below stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't a dead cow. A man was propped against a large boulder, his body a testament to a brutal fight. He was Apache. His buckskin leggings were torn and stained dark with blood that had dried to the color of rust. A deep gash ran across his chest, and an arrow crudely made, not Apache, was embedded high in his shoulder. His face, though contorted in pain, held a fierce, unbreakable nobility. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that even in their clouded state burned with an intensity that rooted Nora to the spot. He was dying. She could see it in the grey pallor beneath his sun-darkened skin. Her first instinct was a jolt of pure frontier-bred fear. The Apache were a spectre, a name used to frighten children and justify violence. But this man, he wasn't a monster from a campfire story. He was a father, because nestled in the crook of his arm, swaddled in a deerskin pouch, decorated with intricate beadwork, was a baby. The infant was quiet, its dark eyes wide and watchful, its tiny hand clutching a fold of the man's tunic. The warrior saw her then. His head lifted a monumental effort. His eyes locked onto hers, not with hatred, but with a desperate silent plea that transcended language. Nora slowly dismounted her rifle held loosely at her side, a gesture meant to show she was not an immediate threat. She approached with the caution of a woman who knew the desert's treachery. The man's lips moved, and a dry, rasping sound emerged. He coughed a wet, terrible sound, and a fresh trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. He shifted his weight, a movement of pure agony to better shield the child. "Water," she said softly, unhooking her canteen. She knelt beside him, the heat of the rock seeping through her denim trousers. Her hands trembled, as she uncorked it and held it to his lips. He took a shallow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. He spoke again, his voice a ghost of a whisper. The words were in his native tongue, but his meaning was clear. He pushed the infant gently towards her. His eyes begged her. Take him. Protect him. Nora looked from the warrior's fierce, fading gaze to the child. The baby's eyes were the same as his father's, deep, dark pools that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancient mountains surrounding them. In that moment, the child wasn't Apache. He wasn't white. He was just a baby alone and helpless, about to be orphaned in a world that would show him no mercy. He was the same age Lily would have been. A sob caught in her throat, thick and painful. The grief she kept so tightly chained inside her burst forth. She saw not an enemy, but a reflection of her own devastating loss. A father desperate to save his child. She began, her voice cracking. I will. She didn't know if he understood her words, but he must have understood the vow in her eyes. A flicker of something gratitude relief passed over his features. His body seemed to let go of its last anchor of tension. His hand, which had been gripping the child swaddling, fell limp to the ground. His head sagged against the rock, and the fire in his eyes went out, leaving only the vast, empty stillness of the desert. Nora stayed there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the buzz of flies and the distant cry of a hawk. The great warrior was gone. She looked at the child who had started to fuss, his tiny face wrinkling as he prepared to cry. Gently, reverently, she reached out and lifted the baby from his father's arms. He was surprisingly light. He smelled of sage and wood smoke, and something uniquely his own. As she held him, his cries subsided, and he stared up at her. In his small, perfect face, she saw not the son of an enemy, but the echo of the daughter she had lost. She knew what she was doing. She was inviting a war into her home, the town of redemption. A day's ride away was built on fear and suspicion. A white woman raising an Apache child would not be tolerated. It was a death sentence one way or another. But as she looked down at the infant in her arms, and then back at the fallen chief who had entrusted his legacy to a stranger, she knew there was no other choice. A promise had been made in the dust, witnessed only by the buzzards and God. And Nora Thompson was a woman who kept her promises. She wrapped the child securely, took one last look at the noble face of his father, and turned toward home, carrying the future of a chief in her arms. The ride back to Promise Creek Ranch was a blur of conflicting emotions. The baby nestled against her chest in a makeshift sling, slept for most of the journey, his warmth a startling, bittersweet comfort. Nora's mind, however, was a maelstrom. Every plodding step of Dust Devil's hooves was a drumbeat marching her toward a confrontation she was not ready for. Her small cabin, a sturdy structure of cottonwood and stone, built by Samuel's own hands, looked both like a sanctuary and a cage as she approached. Inside the silence she had grown to hate was gone, replaced by the soft breathing of the infant. She laid him down on her own bed, on the patchwork quilt she had made while waiting for Lily. The sight of him there, so small and out of place, solidified her resolve. She needed supplies. Milk, if she could get it from a neighbor's goat, and cloth for diapers. The thought of going into redemption made her stomach clench. She decided to name him. He couldn't just be the baby. Staring at his peaceful, sleeping face, she thought of the husband she had loved, and the life they had planned. Samuel, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. I'll call you Sam. It felt right a way of honoring one Samuel by saving another. It was also a shield. He would be Sam Thompson, her boy. 2 days later, with Sam swaddled and hidden as best she could in a basket, she rode into the town of redemption. The name was a cruel joke. The town offered little in the way of salvation, existing mostly on a diet of whiskey suspicion and self-righteous piety. Its single dusty street was flanked by a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and the sheriff's office. Her first stop was the mercantile run by the beady-eyed and perpetually gossiping Silas Croft. He watched her over his spectacles as she gathered her goods. "Fever take another one of your chickens, Nora?" he asked, his voice laced with false sympathy. He knew full well she was buying more than she usually did. "Just stocking up Silas," she said, keeping her voice even. "Winter comes faster than you think." As he was totaling her purchase, a small whimper came from the basket at her feet. Silas's eyes narrowed. "What's that you got there?" Before she could answer, the door swung open, and Sheriff Brody filled the frame. Thaddeus Brody was a man whose authority came not from a sense of justice, but from the size of his gut and the shiny star pinned to his chest. He saw the world in black and white. Settlers were white, savages were red, and the line between them was to be drawn with lead. He caught the sound, too. "What in tarnation is that sound, Nora?" He boomed, striding over. Her heart hammered. There was no hiding it now. With a steadying breath, she lifted the blanket from the basket. Sam's dark eyes blinked up at the sudden light. Silence descended on the store. It was thick and suffocating. Silas Croft's jaw dropped. Sheriff Brody's face, normally flushed from drink, turned a mottled shade of purple. "Sweet Mother of God," Silas breathed. "It's an Apache." "Where did you get that?" Brody demanded, his hand dropping to the butt of his Colt revolver. His voice wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "I found him," Nora said, her voice stronger than she felt. "His parents. They were gone. I couldn't just leave him to the coyotes. His parents were probably part of that raiding party that hit the Miller homestead last spring." Brody spat. "They're vermin. You should have done the world a favor and left him right where you found him." Nora stood up, her 5'5" frame seeming to grow as she placed herself between the sheriff and the basket. "He is a baby sheriff, an innocent child. His name is Sam." "Sam!" Brody laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You can put a Christian name on him, Nora, but it won't wash the savage out. You can't keep it. It ain't right. It ain't natural. He is my son now." Nora declared the words, feeling truer the moment she said them. "The law doesn't have a say in it." "The hell it doesn't." Brody jabbed a thick finger in her direction. "That thing is a danger. What happens when he grows up? What happens when his people come looking for him? They'll burn you out, and maybe the whole town with you. I won't have it." Word had spread. A few men from the saloon, drawn by the commotion, now stood in the doorway, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and open hostility. The whispers started venomous and quick. "Indian lover. Traitor. Gone mad from grief." "You have 1 week, Nora," the sheriff pronounced, his voice carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence. 1 week to take him to the reservation at San Carlos or to the army fort. Let them deal with their own. If that boy is still on your property, come next Sunday. I'll come for him myself, and I'll bring charges against you for harboring a hostile." With that, he turned and stormed out the crowd, parting before him. Silas Croft refused to meet her eyes, shoving her purchases into a sack and taking her money without a word. Nora grabbed the sack and the basket and walked out of the store, the stares of the townspeople like physical blows against her back. The ride home was one of cold fury and simmering fear. They had given her a choice that was no choice at all. The San Carlos reservation was a death camp rife with disease and starvation. The army would see him as nothing more than a prisoner, the son of an enemy to be locked away or worse. That night, as a storm gathered over the mountains, mirroring the one in her soul, Nora sat in her rocking chair, with Sam sleeping in her arms. The sheriff's ultimatum echoed in her head. 1 week. They saw him as a threat, a monster in the making, but she saw a tiny hand curled around her finger. She saw a life she had promised to protect. They called the town Redemption, but Nora knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that true redemption wasn't found in a town's name or a sheriff's law. It was found in a choice, her choice, and she had already made it. Let them come. Promise Creek Ranch would live up to its name. The 7 days of Sheriff Brody's ultimatum came and went. Nora spent them in a state of high alert, her Winchester never far from her side, her ears tuned to the sound of approaching hoofbeats. But the sheriff never came. It was a threat meant to cow her, and when she didn't break, he seemed to content himself with making her a pariah. The town of Redemption turned its back on her completely. Silas Croft would sell her supplies, but only at double the price, and with a sneer. No one offered to help with branding, no one stopped for a friendly chat. Nora Thompson and her Apache son were ghosts living on the edge of a world that wished they would disappear. The years that followed were hard and lonely, but they were not unhappy. Nora poured all the love she had held for her lost family into Sam. She taught him to read from her worn Bible and a tattered copy of Shakespeare. She taught him the names of the constellations her own father had taught her. She taught him how to mend a fence, how to gentle a horse, and how to tell which clouds carried rain and which were just empty promises. Sam grew not like the sun-starved crops in their garden, but like a sturdy desert yucca, tough, resilient, and deeply rooted. His hair was a fall of black silk. His eyes held the keen, observant quality of his father, but his smile was all Nora's. He was a boy of 2 worlds, though he only knew one. He knew the touch of her hand, the sound of her voice, the smell of her baking the stories of a white man's God. Of his own people, he knew nothing. Nora had buried his father with reverence under a pile of stones, and with him, she had buried his story, believing she was protecting Sam from a world that would hate him for it. When Sam was 10, the quiet defiance of their lives was shattered by the arrival of a new power in the valley, Jedodiah Cain. Cain was a cattle baron from Texas, with a face like a clenched fist and eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. He bought up the land surrounding Promise Creek, his vast herds of longhorns drinking the water sources dry and turning the grasslands to dust. His ambition was as wide as the horizon, and Nora's small, water-rich ranch sat right in the middle of it. Cain paid her a visit one sweltering afternoon. He rode a magnificent black stallion and was flanked by 2 hard-faced cowboys, their hands resting on their pistols. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice a low drawl that was more threat than greeting. He didn't dismount, forcing her to look up at him. "Jedodiah Cain, your new neighbor." "I'm aware," Nora said, her hand resting on the porch post, her knuckles white. Sam watched from the doorway behind her, his eyes narrowed with a child's unfiltered distrust. Cain's gaze flickered to Sam, and a smirk twisted his lips. "I've heard stories about you. About your boy." He said the word boy as if it were a foul taste in his mouth. "A charitable woman. Or a foolish one." "What do you want, Mr. Cain?" Nora asked, cutting through his condescension. "Your land?" he said simply. "This pathetic little plot is a thorn in the side of my operation. It has the last reliable spring in this valley, and I intend to have it. I'll give you a fair price, $500. More than it's worth. It's not for sale," Nora stated flatly. "It was my husband's. It's my son's future." Cain's eyes hardened. "That boy has no future here, and neither do you if you're not smart. Take the money. Go east. Find a place where people are more tolerant of your particular tastes." The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. Sam stepped forward from the doorway, his small fists clenched. "This is our home," he said, his voice clear and defiant. Cain laughed, a dismissive, cruel sound. "It's got a mouth on it. You ought to teach your pet some manners, ma'am." He looked from the boy back to Nora. "My offer stands for 1 month. After that, the price goes down. And things have a way of getting difficult for folks who stand in the way of progress." He wheeled his horse around and rode off his men, following like vultures. His visit marked the beginning of a cold war. A section of her fence was cut, and a dozen of Cain's cattle trampled her cornfield. Her well was fouled with a dead animal, forcing her to haul water from the spring for a week. Sheriff Brody dismissed her complaints as accidents or her own mismanagement. She was alone, and Cain knew it. It was during this time that Elias Thorne arrived in redemption. He was a quiet man with shoulders burdened by more than just his work and eyes that had seen too much. He took over the abandoned blacksmith shop, and his hammer rang with a steady, reliable purpose that was a stark contrast to the town's decay. He had been a Texas Ranger, some whispered a man who had walked away from the endless, bloody conflict of the frontier. Elias saw what others pretended not to. He saw Nora struggling but unbowed. He saw the way Cain's men watched her when she came to town. He saw Sam, a bright, capable boy, ostracized for the blood in his veins. One day, Nora's wagon threw a wheel just outside of town. As she struggled with it, Cain and his men rode by, laughing at her plight. Minutes later, Elias appeared walking from his smithy. He didn't say much, just tipped his hat. "Looks like you could use a hand, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and even. Together they fixed the wheel. As he worked, he noticed Sam watching him, the boy's gaze intelligent and wary. "That's a good boy you've got there," Elias said to Nora, wiping grease from his hands. "He's got a strong spirit." "He does," Nora said, a rare warmth in her voice. "He has to." "This is hard country for anyone," Elias said, looking her directly in the eye. "Harder still when you're alone." It was the first kindness she had received from a stranger in a decade. It was a small thing, a repaired wheel, a few sympathetic words. But for Nora, it felt like the first drop of rain after a long and brutal drought. She didn't know it yet, but in Elias Thorne, she had found an ally. And in the face of Jedodiah Cain's growing darkness, she was going to need one. Life settled into a new tense rhythm. Jedodiah Cain's harassment became more insidious, a war of attrition. A dead calf here, a diverted stream there. Each incident was small enough for Sheriff Brody to ignore, but together they formed a tightening noose around Promise Creek Ranch. Through it all, a fragile friendship bloomed between Nora and Elias Thorne. He would find reasons to ride out to her ranch, a fence post that needed a stronger bracket, a horseshoe that needed replacing. He never overstayed, never presumed, but his quiet presence was a bulwark against the loneliness. He spoke to Sam not as a curiosity, but as a young man. He taught him how to properly bank a forge fire and how to read the grain in wood. Sam, in turn, slowly lowered his guard, seeing in Elias a model of manhood starkly different from Cain's bullying cruelty. The twist came when Sam was 15. He had grown tall and lean with a quiet confidence that unnerved the townsfolk and infuriated Cain. One afternoon, one of Cain's prize bulls, a notoriously foul-tempered beast, broke through a fence and wandered onto Nora's property. It was a deliberate provocation. 2 of Cain's men followed ostensibly to retrieve it, but their real purpose was to cause trouble. "That's Cain's bull, Mrs. Thompson." One of them, a man named Cole, sneered. "Best you don't get too attached." The bull was cornered near the creek bed, pawing the ground and bellowing. Nora stood on the porch, her rifle in hand. "Get it off my land, then," she said calmly. Cole and his partner laughed. "He ain't in a listening mood. Might take us all afternoon. We might trample a few things while we're at it." Before Nora could respond, Sam moved. He didn't walk towards the bull with aggression. He moved in a low crouch, his steps silent on the dry earth. He didn't shout. He made a series of low clicks and soft whistle sounds that seemed to come from the earth itself. He moved not in a straight line, but in a patient circling pattern, never meeting the bull's enraged gaze directly, but always present in its periphery. It was a dance of instinct, something no one had taught him. The massive animal's bellows softened to confused grunts. Its pawing ceased. Sam guided it with nothing but posture and sound back towards the broken fence. Cain's men stared their jaws agape. This wasn't how you handled cattle. This was something else, something older and wilder. Sam's focus was absolute, his connection to the animal palpable. When the bull was through the fence, Sam slammed a spare log into the gap and turned to face them. His dark eyes were blazing. "Don't come back," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The men, unnerved and bested by a boy, could only mutter curses and retreat. The incident was a turning point. For Sam, it was the awakening of something deep within him, an instinct he didn't understand but couldn't deny. For Nora, it was a terrifying and prideful moment. She saw the shadow of the chief in her son, a legacy of command and connection to the natural world that her love and her books could never have taught him. The story, twisted and exaggerated, reached the town. The boy hadn't just herded a bull. He had bewitched it. He had used Apache magic. The fear that had lain dormant for years was rekindled. A week later, a stranger rode into redemption. He was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and scars, his long hair grey and braided with eagle feathers. He rode with a dignity that made even Sheriff Brody pause. He was not a reservation Indian. He was a relic of the free bands, a man who had never surrendered. His name was Tlishin, which meant snake, and he was the brother of the great chief Cochise. He had spent 15 years searching for a ghost. He was looking for his nephew Cale, a brilliant war chief of the Chiricahua, who had vanished after a brutal, treacherous attack on his winter camp by white raiders. Kyle's wife had been killed, but rumor persisted that Kyle had escaped with his infant son, Taza. Tlishin's search led him through whispers and rumors to the Arizona Territory. He heard tales of a white woman who had taken in an Apache baby years ago. He came to redemption, seeking the truth. He found it in the face of a 15-year-old boy walking out of the blacksmith's shop. Tlishin dismounted, his old eyes locking on Sam. He saw the proud set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. It was Kyle's face, reborn. He approached slowly, his hand raised in a sign of peace. "Where did you get this?" Tlishin asked in broken Spanish, pointing not at Sam but at a small leather pouch tied to Sam's belt. Sam looked down. It was the deerskin pouch he had been found in as a baby. Nora had given it to him when he was a boy, a relic of a past she wouldn't explain. It was his only possession from that time. "It was my mother's," Sam said, his voice hesitant. Tlishin's eyes filled with a profound sorrow and recognition. He reached into his own medicine bag and pulled out a matching pouch, its beadwork identical. "This was my sister's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was your mother. I am Tlishin. Your father was Kyle, my nephew, the great chief of the Chiricahua. Your name is not Sam. It is Taza." The The world tilted on its axis. Sam stared at the old man, his mind reeling. Elias and Nora, who had heard the commotion, came rushing out. The revelation struck the town like a lightning bolt. He wasn't just an Apache. He was the son of a chief, a leader. To some that made him royalty. To most, including Sheriff Brody and Jedodiah Cain, it made him the most dangerous person in the territory. He was no longer a half-wild charity case. He was a symbol, a living claim to the very land they stood on. Cain, watching from the balcony of the saloon, smiled. The woman and her savage pet had just handed him the weapon he needed to destroy them for good. The arrival of Tlishin and the revelation of Sam's or Tarz's true identity sent a shock wave through the valley. The boy who was once a whispered secret was now a shouted headline. For Sam, the world had been ripped from its foundations. He looked at his hands, at his reflection in the water trough, and saw a stranger. Nora Thompson, the only mother he had ever known, was the woman who had hidden his entire world from him. The love he felt for her was now tangled with a new, confusing thread of betrayal. He spent hours with Tlishin, the old Apache warrior who was his great-uncle. They spoke in a mixture of Spanish and halting English Tlishin, sharing stories of Sam's father, Kyle, his wisdom, his bravery, his dream of a lasting peace. He spoke of his mother, a gentle soul with a fierce heart, and of the Chiricahua people, scattered but not broken. He taught Sam his true name, Tarza, and spoke it with a reverence that made the name Sam feel like an ill-fitting coat. Nora watched this from a distance, her heart breaking. She had done it to protect him, to give him a life free from the hatred she knew the world held. But in her protection, she had denied him his heritage. The gulf opening between them felt as wide and as deep as a canyon. Elias Thorne became the bridge. He spoke to Sam, not defending Nora's choice, but explaining it. "She didn't steal your past, Sam," he said one evening, the sparks of his forge dancing in the twilight. "She saved your future. She saw a baby, not a bloodline. The world gave her every reason to hate, and she chose to love. There ain't many people strong enough to do that." He also tried to comfort Nora. "He's just trying to find his footing on ground that shifted under him. Give him time. The boy you raised is still in there." But Jedodiah Cain had no intention of giving anyone time. The revelation of Tarza's lineage was the perfect tool. He could now paint Nora not as a misguided woman, but as a conspirator, a woman harboring a hostile chief, likely plotting with Tlishin to reclaim Apache lands, starting with Cain's own. Cain's gambit was as brutal as it was brilliant. He began by poisoning the minds of the townspeople who were already primed by fear. His cowboys spread rumors in the saloon. Tlishin wasn't alone. A war party was hiding in the mountains waiting for Tarza's signal. The boy's magic with the bull was retold as dark sorcery. Then he made his move. Under the cover of a new moon, Cain's men drove 24 of his own cattle into a secluded canyon. They slaughtered them, then crudely branded the carcasses with a makeshift Promise Creek Ranch brand, a simple T for Thompson. But they were clever. They also left behind a single distinctive Apache arrow, one they had taken from a raid years before. The next morning, Cain rode into town, his face a mask of fury and feigned grief. "I've been hit," he roared for all to hear. "Rustlers. My cattle were stolen, butchered, the Thompson woman and her savage pet. Sheriff Brody, needing little convincing, formed a posse. When they rode out to the canyon, the scene was exactly as Cain had designed it. Dead cattle, the T brand, and the damning Apache arrow. That's all the proof I need," Brody declared, his prejudice overriding any sense of proper investigation. "She's been in league with them all along. That old warrior and the boy, they're feeding their people with stolen beef. The posse thundered towards Promise Creek Ranch. Elias, hearing the news, saddled his horse in a flash, his face grim. He knew a setup when he saw one. He rode like the devil was on his tail, hoping to get there first. He arrived just minutes before the posse. "Nora Trouble's coming," he yelled as he galloped into the yard. "Cain's framed you for rustling." Nora, Sam, and Tlishan came out of the cabin, their faces etched with alarm. The ground was already starting to tremble with the sound of dozens of approaching horses. "There's no time," Elias said, his eyes finding Sam's. "They've planted evidence, an Apache arrow. They're pinning this on you and Tlishan." Just then, a painful secret twisted in Elias's gut. The arrow they would have used. He knew the fletching, the unique markings of the band it belonged to. It was from the Chiricahua, and it brought back a memory he had spent a decade trying to bury. He had been a young Texas Ranger, part of a unit that had been told they were tracking renegade raiders. They had been led by a civilian scout, a ruthless, ambitious man with cold gray eyes. The scout had led them to a winter camp he claimed was the raiders' base. It wasn't. It was a peaceful village, filled mostly with women and children. The attack was a massacre, and the scout who had lied to them, who had orchestrated the whole thing to clear the land for settlement, was a younger Jedodiah Cain. The arrow was from that day. Cain wasn't just a greedy baron. He was the man responsible for the murder of Tarza's mother. The guilt and horror of it struck Elias dumb. He had spent years running from that memory, and now it stood on Nora's doorstep, about to destroy the only good thing he had found in his life. The posse led by Brody and Cain burst into the clearing, a chaotic mob of angry men with drawn guns. "Nora Thompson!" Brody bellowed. "You're under arrest for cattle rustling and conspiring with hostiles, you and the boy." Cain's eyes glinted with triumph. "And the old murderer too," he sneered, pointing at Tlishan. "This is a lie, Sheriff," Nora cried out, standing her ground. "We have proof," Brody retorted. "Your brand on my dead cattle cane. And this," he held up the Apache arrow. Tlishan's old eyes narrowed as he saw it. He recognized the markings. It was from his family's clan. A profound understanding dawned on his face as he looked from the arrow to Cain. He knew, but before anyone could speak, Cain gave a signal. One of his men raised a rifle and fired a shot that splintered the porch post right next to Sam's head. It was the spark the mob needed. Chaos erupted. "Get 'em!" Cain roared. Elias shoved Nora and Sam back towards the cabin. Inside now, he drew his own revolver, his face a mask of torment. He was trapped between the posse he once might have been a part of, and the secret of his own past, a secret that connected him directly to the tragedy that started it all. They were cornered, framed, and facing a mob that wanted blood, not justice. Cain's gambit had succeeded perfectly. Trapped inside the small cabin, the world devolved into a terrifying cacophony of shouts, splintering wood and the thunder of gunfire. The posse fueled by whiskey, and Cain's lies laid siege to the small homestead. Bullets chewed through the walls, sending dust and debris flying. Elias, Nora, and Tlishan returned fire sparingly, their shots aimed not to kill, but to keep the mob at bay. Inside the tension was a living thing. Sam Tarza was crouched by the window, his face a storm of emotions, fear, rage, and a terrifying clarity. The life he had known was a lie, and the truth was a death sentence. They will not listen to reason. Tlishan said, his voice a low rumble, as he reloaded an old Sharps rifle with steady hands. He looked at Sam, his gaze intense. They see only what they fear. They see the son of Kyle, and they believe you have come for revenge. I don't even know who that is. Sam burst out, his voice cracking with the anguish of a boy caught between two worlds. "I'm Sam Thompson." "Are you?" Elias countered, his voice sharp with urgency and the weight of his own terrible secret. He grabbed Sam by the shoulders, forcing the boy to look at him. "Listen to me. Jedodiah Cain is not just a greedy man. The arrow they found. The proof, I know it. 15 years ago, I was a ranger. Cain was our scout. He led us to a Chiricahua camp. He told us they were warriors who had hit a settlement. He lied. It was a camp of families. It was a slaughter." The blood drained from Nora's face. Sam stared, uncomprehending. "Your mother was killed in that raid." Elias said the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "Your father Kyle was wounded, but escaped with you. Cain orchestrated it all to clear the Apache from this valley, so he could claim the land. This isn't just about your ranch, Nora. It never was. He's been trying to bury the last living witness to his crime, you Taza." The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. The abstract stories from Tlishan suddenly had a face, the sneering, cruel face of Jedodiah Cain. The man who had tormented them for years was the murderer of his mother, the destroyer of his people. In that instant, something inside the boy shattered and reformed. Sam Thompson, the quiet rancher's son, gave way to Taza, the son of a chief. A fire ignited in his eyes, the same fire Nora had seen in his dying father's gaze. It was not the wildfire of vengeance, but the focused, burning heat of purpose. "The lie is his strength," Taza said, his voice suddenly calm and clear, stripped of all its boyhood uncertainty. "So the truth must be our weapon." He turned to Tlishan. "You know the mountains, the high passes. Is there a way out of here?" Tlishan nodded. "There is a path through the rocks to the north, a goat's path. They will not expect it." "Good," Taza said, his mind working with a speed and clarity that astonished them all. He was no longer reacting, he was leading. He looked at Elias. "You know Cain. You know how he thinks. You and I will draw their fire to the west side of the cabin." He then turned to Nora. "Mother," he said the word, a powerful affirmation of their bond. "You and Tlishan will slip out the back, take the horses, and ride for the old mission ruins 2 miles east. Wait for us there." "No," Nora protested, grabbing his arm. "I am not leaving you." "You are not leaving me," Taza said firmly, his hand covering hers. "You are completing the mission. You must. Tlishan cannot ride that hard alone." He looked into her eyes, and she saw not a boy playing soldier, but a commander. "I promise I will find you." It was a vow spoken with the authority of his ancestors. Reluctantly she agreed. Under the cover of the main firefight, directed by Taza and Elias, Nora and Tlishan slipped out a back window. They crept along the dry creek bed, the sounds of the siege masking their escape. They reached the small corral, saddled the horses, and disappeared into the twilight like ghosts. Meanwhile, Taza and Elias kept the posse pinned down. Taza moved with a fluid grace he never knew he possessed, using the terrain and the shadows with an instinct that was pure Apache. He used his knowledge of the land, learned at Nora's side, combined with the warrior's blood that now sang in his veins. He wasn't fighting like a cornered settler. He was fighting like a Chiricahua. "They're gone!" Cain roared, finally realizing the return fire had lessened and was coming from only 2 positions. "They've run for the hills after them." This was the moment Taza had planned. As the disorganized posse began to surge forward, Taza and Elias melted back into the deeper shadows of the rocks behind the cabin, beginning their own retreat along the treacherous path Tlishan had described. But Cain was no fool. He saw the main body of his men charging blindly and held back his cold eyes, scanning the terrain. He spotted the movement high in the rocks, two figures climbing where no white man would think to go. He knew it was the boy and the ex-ranger. "Brody, you fool, take your men and circle around the east," Cain commanded. "Cole, you're with me? The rest of you keep them busy. They're trapped in the rocks." Cain, driven by the desperate need to silence the last witness to his old crimes, began his own pursuit, not with the blind rage of the mob, but with the cold patience of a hunter. The broader battle for the ranch was over. It had now become a deadly personal stalk through the moonlit crags of the Dragoon Mountains. Taza, son of a chief, was leading his enemy onto his own ancestral ground. The chase through the mountains was a desperate scramble in the pale moonlight. Taza moved with an eerie, inherited certainty, his feet finding purchase on stones, his eyes barely saw. He was no longer just on the land. He was a part of it. Elias, though a skilled tracker, struggled to keep pace, his body not accustomed to the vertical, unforgiving terrain. Below them, the lights of the posse's torches fanned out a closing net of fireflies. Cain and his man, Cole, were climbing with grim determination, their progress slower but steady. "He knows," Elias panted, leaning against a rock to catch his breath. "Cain knows this is about more than cattle. He won't stop." "He's not hunting us," Taza replied, his gaze fixed on the valley below. "He is running from the ghost of my father. We will not outrun him. We have to face him." Taza's plan formed a strategy born of two worlds. He knew from Nora's lessons that the men in the posse were followers driven by Brody's authority and Cain's charisma. Separate them, and they were just scared townsmen. He also knew from the blood in his veins how to use the land as a weapon. "The old silver mine," Taza said. "The one they call the Devil's Throat. It's a half-mile north of here. The entrance is unstable. We can make our stand there." They pushed on, reaching the mine entrance, just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky. It was a dark, ominous gash in the mountainside, its timbers rotting. Down below they could see the posse converging, Sheriff Brody directing them. Cain and Cole were closing in from above. "This is it," Elias said, checking his revolver. He looked at Taza, at the boy who had become a man overnight. "Whatever happens, I'm proud to have stood with you." The first to arrive was not Cain, but Sheriff Brody, and a handful of his men, panting and uncertain in the rocky terrain. "Give it up, boy," Brody yelled, taking cover behind a boulder. "There's nowhere left to run." "You're wrong, Sheriff," Taza's voice echoed from the darkness of the mine entrance. "We're not running. We're here to tell you the truth. Jedodiah Cain is the murderer and the thief." "Lies!" Cain's voice boomed from the ridge above them. He and Cole had taken a superior position, their rifles aimed down. "Don't listen to the savage Brody. He's trying to save his own skin." "Ask him, Sheriff," Elias shouted. "Ask him about the massacre at Apache Creek 15 years ago. Ask him why a civilian scout was leading a company of Texas Rangers." Brody looked confused, his gaze shifting from the mine to Cain above. The seed of doubt had been planted. He was a prejudiced man, but he wasn't Cain's puppet. "What's he talking about?" "Cain," Brody called out. "Don't be a fool," Cain snarled, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. "Finish them." He raised his rifle, but Taza was ready. In the pre-dawn light, he had noticed a large, precariously balanced pile of loose rocks and scree on the ledge directly above Cain's position. While Elias had been talking, Taza had been silently climbing the rock face on the far side of the mine. Just as Cain aimed, Taza gave a powerful shove to a key boulder at the base of the rock pile. With a deep groan, the entire section of the cliff gave way. A river of rock and dust cascaded down, not on Brody and his men, but directly onto the ridge where Cain and Cole were perched. Cole screamed as the rock slide swept him away. Cain, with a curse, leaped backward, barely avoiding the main deluge, but losing his footing. He tumbled down the steep incline, his rifle flying from his hands, and landed in a heap on the flat ground, before the mine, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Silence. The posse stared, stunned. Tazza slid down the rock face and stood before the wounded, disarmed cattle baron. Elias emerged from the mine, his pistol trained on the posse. Cain writhed on the ground, his face a mask of pain and hate. "Kill him!" he shrieked at Brody. "He's an animal. Kill him!" But the spell was broken. The posse saw not a savage monster, but a boy standing over a defeated man. They saw Elias Thorne, a respected former ranger, standing in his defense. "He's the animal," Elias said, his voice ringing with conviction as he walked forward. "This man, Jedodiah Cain, orchestrated the murder of Tazza's mother and dozens of other innocent people to steal their land. He lied to the U.S. Army. He lied to you. He fouled Nora's well-cut fences and then murdered his own cattle to frame a woman and a boy whose only crime was surviving his greed." Elias looked directly at Sheriff Brody. "You wanted proof, Sheriff. I am the proof. I was there. My testimony will hang him in any court in this territory." Brody stared at Cain, then at Elias, and finally at Tazza, who stood not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber dignity. The sheriff's bluster and bigotry crumbled, replaced by the weary realization that he had been a pawn in a rich man's evil game. He holstered his pistol. "It's over, Cain," he said, his voice heavy. "It's over." The posse slowly lowered their weapons, their faces a mixture of shame and disbelief. Just then, two riders appeared galloping hard. It was Nora and Tlishin. She had waited as long as she could, her mother's heart unable to bear the uncertainty. She saw Tazza safe, and a cry of relief escaped her lips. She slid from her horse and ran to him, wrapping him in an embrace that bridged both their worlds. "My son," she whispered. "My son." "I'm here, Mother," he answered, holding her tight. Jedodiah Cain was taken back to redemption, his broken leg a minor injury compared to the ruin of his empire. Elias's testimony, combined with that of a few other former rangers, he knew was enough to see Cain tried and sentenced to hang not just for rustling, but for the old massacre he thought he had buried. The town of Redemption was forced to reckon with itself. The story of Tazza, the boy raised by the widow Thompson, became a legend. He was no longer an outcast. He was the boy who exposed the devil in their midst. In the end, Tazza never had to choose between being Sam Thompson and Tazza, son of Cale. He was both. He was the strength and wisdom of a chief, tempered by the love and compassion of a frontier mother. He stayed on the ranch with Nora, his connection to his great-uncle Tlishin and his people strong. But his home was at Promise Creek. Elias Thorne stayed too, the ghosts of his past finally laid to rest, finding in Nora and Tazza the family he never thought he deserved. The land knew peace, a fragile but resilient peace, built not on a treaty signed in ink, but on a promise whispered in the dust and the courage of a woman who chose love in a world of hate. The story of Nora Thompson and Tazza is a powerful reminder that family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the promises you keep and the love you choose to give against all odds. It's a testament to the fact that even in the harshest landscapes, scarred by prejudice and violence, courage and compassion can take root and blossom into something extraordinary. Their journey from loss and survival to creating a legacy of understanding shows us that the deepest bonds are often forged in the greatest fires. If this story of sacrifice identity and unbreakable love in the heart of the Old West moved you, please help us share more tales like it. Hit that like button to let us know you were here, and share this video with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another journey into the past. What part of Nora and Tarza's story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.